At 9:12 on a Thursday morning, Vanessa Crow's attorney stood in the doorway of Eli Mercer's shop and told him the steel fixture under his daughter's hands did not belong to him. 48 hours earlier, Crow Racing Holdings had sold Eli a rusted race trailer for $900, complete with every permanently attached fixture. Now the company wanted one fixture back. A 30-foot chassis jig hidden beneath a false floor, carrying measurement marks that matched the private notebook of Eli's late father. The lawyer offered $10,000 and a non-disclosure agreement. If Eli refused, he said, Crow's security team would return with a court order before Monday. Eli looked at his 17-year-old daughter, Claire, then at the 3 sets of hand-stamped coordinates no racing history book had ever credited to Walter Mercer. He folded the check once, placed it on the steel rail, and said, "You sold us the trailer. You don't get to buy my father's name for $10,000. That refusal turned an old piece of shop equipment into a fight over property, authorship, and who had really built the prototypes that made the Crow family famous. Eli was 56, broad through the shoulders, careful with his knees, and better at making a straight tube stay straight than at asking anyone for help. He had spent 34 years building and repairing race chassis, most of them for regional teams that paid late but remembered honest work. His wife, Anna, had died 4 years earlier after a brief illness. Since then, he had raised Claire alone in a small house behind Mercer Fabrication, the 2-bay shop they could barely afford to keep. Claire was a high school senior who could read a tape to 1/64th of an inch, and could also tell when her father was pretending not to worry about the electric bill. The race trailer had looked like a practical answer. One wall of the shop roof leaked. Their old enclosed trailer had a bent axle, and Claire wanted to enter a student fabrication contest in the spring. A mobile workshop would let them take small repair jobs at tracks and give her a place to build her project, when Crow Racing announced the liquidation of equipment from its original facility. Eli saw a 28-year-old gooseneck trailer listed as scrap storage. The photographs showed rust along the lower panels, a dead generator, and a floor buried under cabinets. The listing said, "Trailer and all attached fixtures, as is, where is." $900 was nearly every dollar Eli had set aside for a replacement welder, but the frame looked sound. At the auction yard, Vanessa Crow had arrived in a black sedan with 2 assistants and a camera crew filming a business profile. She was 43, composed, and newly celebrated for turning her late father's regional racing company into a licensing and engineering brand. Grant Crow had died the previous winter. Vanessa planned to sell the old property, preserve a few famous cars, and erase the annual cost of storing what she called obsolete equipment. When she saw Eli studying the trailer, she asked whether he planned to haul livestock in it. "Tools," Eli said. Vanessa glanced at the peeling Crow Racing stripe, then paint over the name. "That thing hasn't represented us in 20 years. Claire had heard the dismissal, but she did not react. She walked around the landing legs, photographed the identification plate, and asked the auction clerk to confirm that the cabinets and bolted benches were included. The clerk, Martin Sy, checked the lot sheet and wrote the same words on the bill of sale. All attached fixtures and contents not separately tagged. Eli paid by cashier's check. Vanessa signed the transfer as managing member because the trailer title had remained in the holding company. By noon, a borrowed truck was pulling the rusted trailer away from the Crow yard. Eli noticed the first contradiction before they reached home. An empty trailer of that size should have weighed about 8,000 pounds. At a public scale, it weighed 13,400. The cabinets held old hoses, torn covers, and a box of obsolete fasteners, nowhere near 5,000 pounds. Eli crawled beneath the frame with a flashlight. The axles were heavy but ordinary. Above them, however, the main cross members had reinforcement plates that did not appear on the manufacturer's drawing. "Maybe they used it to haul engines," Claire said. "Maybe," Eli answered, though the pattern of the plates troubled him. His father had reinforced shop floors the same way, with long fish-shaped ends to prevent cracks. Walter Mercer had called them leaves. Eli had not seen anyone else cut them quite like that. They spent Saturday removing rotten plywood and mouse-chewed insulation. Claire labeled every wire before cutting it. Eli saved hardware that most people would have thrown away. Near the rear door, one sheet of plywood would not lift after the screws came out. It had been glued to a steel plate, and the plate continued beneath the cabinets. Claire tapped it with a brass hammer. The sound changed at 4 exact lines running lengthwise. They removed the cabinets carefully. Under the false floor lay 2 parallel steel rails, black with old cutting oil, connected by adjustable crossbars and datum towers folded flat into recesses. It was not cargo reinforcement. It was a full chassis jig built into the trailer itself. The trailer had once been a mobile prototype shop. Eli brushed grime from the forward rail. A sequence appeared under his rag, WM 71488, followed by a small triangular punch mark. His hand stopped. Walter had marked personal tools with that triangle. 1 short strike on each side, because stamped letters could be ground away, but the punch depth remained visible after refinishing. Claire did not ask whether he was sure. She went to the shop office and returned with a cloth-bound notebook that had lived in Anna's cedar chest. Walter's name was written inside. Page after page contained suspension points, tube lengths, caster targets, and hand-drawn triangles beside correction notes. 3 groups were labeled only P1, P2, and P3. Claire set the open book beside the rail and compared a string of numbers. "Dad, these station marks are the same," she said. 36 1/4, 61 7/8. Then this offset 3/16 left. All of them. Eli read the figures twice. His father had worked at Crow Racing from 1986 until 1991, when Grant Crow announced 3 experimental chassis that later formed the basis of the team's most successful cars. Public accounts described Grant as the designer and Walter as a welder. Walter never argued in public. He left the team, opened Mercer Fabrication, and refused every question Eli asked about those years. By Sunday afternoon, Claire had photographed the discovery from the first unbroken floor panel through every exposed stamp. Eli insisted on keeping a continuous video of the removal. They bagged screws, recorded the trailer plate, and backed the files up on 2 drives. It was a habit Walter had taught him after a customer once blamed him for damage that existed before a repair. "A good measurement settles metal," Walter used to say. "A good record settles men." Eli called Martin, the auction clerk, to ask whether any fixture had been excluded. Martin reviewed the lot file and said no. He also warned that Vanessa's office had already called about the unusual scale weight. Someone from Crow Racing had seen Claire's short private video because a classmate had reposted a single frame from it. Eli asked Claire to remove the post. She did, but the image of Walter's initials had already traveled. The lawyer arrived the next morning with the $10,000 check. His name was Daniel Price, and he did not behave like a bully. He photographed the rails from the doorway, declined to enter without permission, and explained Crow's position in precise terms. The auction had sold a titled trailer, he said, not prototype tooling or intellectual property. The jig had been concealed and unknown to both parties. A court could rescind a sale made under mutual mistake. In addition, Crow Racing claimed the fixture was a trade asset wrongfully installed in the trailer years earlier. Wrongfully installed by whom? Claire asked. Price looked at her, then at Eli. That is one of the facts we need to determine. Eli respected the answer more than he wanted to. Mutual mistake was a real argument. $900 did not look like a fair price for specialized tooling, even if the bill of sale favored him. But the lawyer's proposed agreement required Eli and Claire to surrender the notebook for authentication, delete all images, and make no statement connecting Walter to the prototypes. That was not a simple effort to recover property. "You can inspect copies here," Eli said. "The originals stay with us." Price left the check and a written demand at noon. Crow Racing canceled a $12,000 repair order that Mercer Fabrication had expected to begin the following week. The order had come through a customer affiliated with Crow's parts network. No reason was given. Without that work, Eli could cover payroll for his one employee, Luis Ortega, for only 6 more weeks. Claire blamed herself for the posted image. Eli told her the responsibility was his because he had agreed to buy the trailer. She knew he was avoiding the larger truth. He had spent his career telling people Walter was an excellent fabricator, while carefully never saying what Walter might have designed. By treating the old silence as respect, Eli had helped it survive. That evening, Claire asked why Walter's notebook had been in Anna's chest rather than the shop archive. Eli admitted that his father had given it to him 6 months before his death. Walter had said, "Keep this away from men who need my work more than they need my name." Eli had assumed bitterness had confused the old man. He had never checked the measurements against surviving Crow cars. "You didn't believe him," Claire said. "I believed he was hurt. That's not the same as believing every conclusion a hurt man reaches." But now, Eli looked through the office window at the exposed rails. "Now we measure before we conclude." They began with what they could prove themselves. Using a laser level borrowed from Lewis, Claire mapped every datum hole and tower position. Eli showed her how to account for temperature and floor slope. The first group of settings matched the P1 drawing within 30,000ths of an inch. The second group matched P2, including an asymmetrical rear pickup Walter had circled twice. The third set could not be fully reconstructed because one tower was missing, but the surviving holes matched the notebook station numbers. The P2 settings revealed more than a match. One rear tower had been cut apart and moved 9/32 of an inch. The correction was ugly by Walter's standards, with a visible root pass and 2 filled holes, which meant it had probably been made under track pressure. In the notebook, Claire found a Thursday entry saying the first car had become unstable when the fuel load dropped. A Friday entry recorded the same 9/32 move. A Sunday result sheet in Walter's files showed the car completing its longest run of the season. The measurable improvement did not prove ownership, but it showed the notebook was a working record, not a memoir assembled years later. Eli had Claire repeat the setup without him. He wanted to know whether his explanations were leading her toward the answer. She began from the fixed center line, used only Walter's written stations, and brought every surviving tower within 40,000ths. Then she reversed the process, measuring the physical jig and predicting the missing figures hidden under a folded corner of the page. 5 of 6 predictions were exact. The 6th differed by 1/16 because a handwritten 7 looked like a 1. When they unfolded the corner, the note beside it said, "Check after rail cools." Claire smiled for the first time since Price's visit. "Grandpa left enough for somebody else to repeat the work," she said. "That's what a real drawing is supposed to do," Eli answered. They asked Helen to arrange a survey by a licensed industrial metrologist. Crow objected that a new inspection might alter the evidence. So Eli proposed a protocol: non-contact measurements only, one instrument selected jointly, mirrored data files, and a signed log of everyone entering the trailer. Price accepted. The metrologist, Aaron Cole, knew nothing about racing history. He gave each party the same point cloud and reported only tolerances. His map confirmed that the hidden rails carried 3 repeatable configurations, and that the correction cuts had aged consistently with the surrounding metal. The result eliminated the easiest accusation, that Eli had fabricated the markings after purchase. It also created a problem for Eli. Cole found that one forward datum tower was not Walter's work. The metal was newer, and its bolt pattern matched a Crow Racing maintenance drawing from 1997. Price argued that company employees had substantially modified and maintained the fixture, which supported continuing company ownership. Eli could have dismissed the later tower as irrelevant. Instead, he marked it clearly in his evidence list and agreed it belonged in the history. Claire asked why he had volunteered a fact the other side might use. Eli placed Walter's notebook beside Cole's report. "Because if we only keep measurements that help us, these stop being records and become advertising. Your grandfather deserved better than advertising. So does Grant Crow." That distinction reached Vanessa through Price. The following morning, she instructed her disposal manager not to destroy any remaining mobile shop records. It was the first useful action she took for Eli's position, though he did not learn about it until later. In the same email, she directed the sales department to suspend any new certificate describing Grant as sole chassis designer. She was not ready to admit Walter's authorship, but she was no longer willing to add fresh claims while the physical evidence contradicted them. Near the left rail, Claire found 3 layers of paint inside a protected recess. Gray primer, crow blue, then black. Between the first 2 layers was a narrow brass plate, stamped Mercer Mobile Fixture Number 1. 2 screw heads had been filled and painted over. Someone had deliberately hidden the maker's plate without removing it. Eli did not celebrate. A plate could be added, a notebook could be copied. Even matching dimensions proved that Walter knew the designs. Not necessarily that he created them. They needed an independent record dated before Crow's public claims. Walter's old business files filled 7 dented cabinets. Claire proposed scanning them all. Eli said they had 3 days before prices threatened filing and could not search at random. She built a list from the notebook: supplier names, steel heat numbers, dates, and the initials beside each correction. One set of initials, RB, appeared beside all 3 prototypes. Eli remembered Ruth Bell, a suspension engineer who had worked contract jobs around the Midwest. She was 72 now and lived 2 counties away. Eli had not spoken to her in 15 years. When he called, she said she would not take sides in a family dispute. Then he read one line from Walter's notebook. RB says left rear rise is lying to us. Move upper point, not spring. Ruth was quiet for several seconds. Where did you find that? Inside my father's book, beside a jig carrying his name. She came the next morning in an old station wagon, bringing a sealed document box and a folding magnifier. Ruth did not touch the jig until Claire showed her the discovery video and the bagged floor screws. Then she examined the brass plate, paint layers, and punch marks. She identified 2 welds as Walter's work from the sequence of starts and stops, but she warned that personal recognition was not proof. Her box contained carbon copies of invoices from Bell Vehicle Dynamics to Walter Mercer personally. The earliest, dated 5 months before Crow Racing, revealed Prototype 1. Charged for suspension calculations and track testing. Each invoice referenced Walter drawing numbers rather than Crow numbers. Ruth also had a photograph taken in 1988. It showed Walter and Ruth standing inside the same trailer, with the jig fully raised and an unfinished chassis clamped to it. Grant Crow was visible outside the rear door, speaking to a sponsor. On the back, Ruth had written the date and the words "Walter's third correction finally held." The processing stamp from a local photo lab matched the month. It was strong evidence, but Ruth gave them something more important: a credible complication. Grant paid for the steel, the engine program, the track, and most of our hours, she said. Walter designed the fixture and drove the chassis geometry. Grant made decisions about what the team could afford. If you're going to say Walter did everything, I won't support you. That would only replace one false story with another, Eli told her. He wanted the record to say exactly what each man had done. Ruth nodded. Then you may have a case worth making. By Wednesday, Vanessa Crow had filed for a temporary restraining order in county court. She sought to prevent alteration, sale, or public display of the jig. She did not yet demand immediate possession because Price could not establish that removal would be safe or that the fixture was separable from the trailer. The judge scheduled an expedited hearing for Friday morning and ordered both sides to preserve everything. Vanessa also released a statement saying an historically significant company asset had been mistakenly transferred during a routine disposal. She did not mention Walter. The statement was reasonable enough to shape local opinion. Online comments accused Eli of exploiting a clerical error. A customer postponed a deposit. Luis offered to work without pay for 2 weeks, and Eli refused. Instead, he sold a restored tube bender he had owned since his first year in business. It covered payroll and legal fees, but losing it cut the shop's capacity in half. Claire watched the buyer load the bender. Grandpa gave you that. He gave me tools so I could use them, Eli said, not so I could build a shrine while Luis misses rent. The sale clarified the cost of the fight. Eli was protecting his father's authorship, but he would not sacrifice a living worker to do it. Claire revised the student contest plan that night. Instead of building a complete chassis, she would design a portable measuring system based on non-proprietary principles Walter had taught. It required less tubing and more careful documentation. Price asked to inspect the trailer under the preservation order. Eli agreed on the condition that both sides record the visit and that Ruth attend. Vanessa came with Price, a corporate historian named Owen Pike, and an equipment appraiser. It was the first time she had seen the exposed jig. For several minutes, her practiced composure gave way to concentration. She traced the air above the maker's plate without touching it. Her father had kept a framed photograph of Prototype 3 in his office. Vanessa said the rail spacing looked familiar from images taken during its construction. Pike argued that Walter had been an employee, and therefore any fixture he built belonged to Crow Racing. Eli produced tax records showing Walter was paid as an independent contractor during 1987 and 1988. Price answered with ledger entries for weekly payments and company-supplied material. The legal position narrowed. Ownership could depend on the original agreement, which neither side possessed. Then the appraiser found 4 welds connecting the jig base directly to the trailer's reinforced crossmembers. Removing the fixture would require cutting structural metal and engineering new supports. In ordinary property terms, the jig behaved less like loose contents and more like a built-in system. That strengthened Eli's sale argument, though it did not settle ownership before the sale. Vanessa offered him $125,000 for the trailer, the notebook, and all publicity rights. She said Crow Racing would restore the mobile shop and place it in the company's new heritage center. Walter would be acknowledged as a senior fabricator. Eli asked whether the exhibit would credit him as the chassis designer of the 3 prototypes. "I can't approve a claim the archive hasn't established," she said. Ruth lifted one invoice. "Your archive didn't establish it because your father controlled the archive." Vanessa's jaw tightened, but she did not raise her voice. "And your invoices show consultation, not exclusive authorship. My company has partners, licensees, and employees whose livelihoods depend on accurate history. I won't rewrite it because a hidden plate creates a compelling story." It was her best argument, and Eli understood it. Crow Racing licensed reproductions of the early chassis. If Walter owned part of the design rights, buyers might question existing agreements. Vanessa was trying to protect a business of 80 employees from a claim she had inherited, but her proposed acknowledgement still reduced Walter to the role already printed in every company book. "Then don't rewrite anything yet," Eli said. "Open the records. Let independent people test them." Vanessa refused public access but offered confidential review by Pike and a mutually selected lawyer. Claire noticed that Pike had not once examined the notebook's paper, dates, or supplier references. His job was to defend an established narrative, not test it. After the Crow Group left, Claire found a pencil rubbing stuck behind one folded datum tower. The brittle sheet carried 3 partial words: Mercer, revision, and accepted. A dark rectangle suggested it had been pressed against a larger metal plate. Eli remembered Walter complaining that Grant had installed approval plates on each prototype. If one of those plates survived, it might identify drawing ownership and acceptance dates. Only 2 of the original prototypes were known to exist. Prototype 1 had been rebuilt beyond recognition. Prototype 3 belonged to a private collection, scheduled for display at the Crow Heritage Center. Vanessa controlled access to it. Price rejected Eli's request for inspection, saying the car was unrelated to ownership of the trailer. Claire studied old race photographs instead. In one high-resolution scan from a magazine archive, a small rectangular plate appeared on the inside of Prototype 3's left frame rail. Its proportions matched the rubbing. The photograph had been taken before the car's first public race. She called the magazine's retired photographer, who had donated negatives to a state university. The university archivist confirmed that the original contact sheets were available for research, but retrieval would take several days. The Friday hearing addressed possession, not historical credit. Price argued that Eli had paid $900 for an item now appraised as part of a collection worth far more, proving a shared mistake. Eli's attorney, a local property lawyer named Helen Ward, kept the issue narrower. Crow had drafted the listing, inspected the lot, signed the title, and included attached fixtures. The hidden weight was discoverable through ordinary diligence. More importantly, cutting out the jig would damage the purchased trailer. The judge extended the preservation order for 21 days, but denied Crow immediate possession. Neither party could move, alter, or publicize the fixture beyond responding to existing claims. The judge encouraged a negotiated inspection and warned Eli that ownership by sale did not automatically grant intellectual property rights. He warned Crow that corporate surprise did not automatically undo a complete transfer. Outside court, reporters asked whether Eli had tricked a grieving family at an estate sale. He answered only that the sale had been a commercial liquidation, not a private grieving decision, and that he would follow the court order. Vanessa watched from 10 feet away. For the first time, she seemed to understand that the story her advisors had framed could damage her too. The next pressure came from somewhere Eli had not expected. Claire's school removed Mercer Fabrication as her contest sponsor after receiving a letter claiming the shop possessed disputed proprietary equipment. The principal did not accuse her of wrongdoing, but said the school could not risk becoming part of litigation. Claire could still compete under the school's general entry if she stopped using the shop name. The letter had not come from Price. It came from Owen Pike on Heritage Center Stationery, and it overstated the court order by saying Crow retained ownership of all designs found in the trailer. Helen sent him a correction and copied Vanessa. Price called within an hour to say the company would withdraw the letter, but the principal had already circulated it to the vocational board. Retraction could stop future harm. It could not make the suspicion disappear. Vanessa drove to the school herself. She met with the principal, the contest coordinator, and Claire, without Ellie in the room. She acknowledged that ownership remained undecided, and that Claire had not violated the preservation order. She would not endorse the Mercer claim, but she signed a statement saying the student had documented the discovery responsibly. The coordinator restored Claire's eligibility under the shop name. It was a meaningful correction, offered before any court forced it. Claire still declined to compete. Her reason surprised Vanessa. "You fixed the letter, and I appreciate that," she said. "But I built my entry on Grandpa's method. Until we know which parts are his and which belong to your company, I can't present it as only mine." Vanessa studied the 16-year-old drawings Claire had brought as examples, each carrying revision boxes and initials. "My father never used boxes like these," she said. "Maybe somebody around him did." Vanessa left with a photocopy of one blank revision format. In Grant's office 2 days later, she found the same layout on the cover sheets of 3 unopened storage envelopes. Pike had cataloged them as routine fabrication notes and never broken the old seals. Under the preservation agreement, Vanessa could not open them alone. She notified both legal teams and placed the envelopes in a locked archive cabinet. That choice preserved evidence which might otherwise have been dismissed as newly discovered company material. Ellie learned about her school visit from the principal, not from Vanessa. It complicated the simple anger that had kept him moving. She was still using lawyers to recover the jig and still offering money for silence, but she had corrected a false claim made in her name. He told Claire that fairness required them to remember both actions. "Can a person do the right thing and the wrong thing in the same week?" Claire asked. "Most of us manage it in the same day," he said. Ellie told her to accept. She refused. "The whole point of the project is traceable measurement," she said. "If I hide where I learned it because somebody sent a letter, then I'm doing the polite version of what happened to Grandpa." She chose to withdraw from the contest instead. Ellie was angry, not at her, but at a cost he had never meant her to pay. He considered taking Vanessa's offer that night. $125,000 would repair the roof, replace the tube bender, and cover Claire's first 2 years of college. The company could keep its history, and his daughter could keep her future. Claire found him sitting in the trailer with the check proposal open on his phone. She did not tell him what to do. She asked one question: "If we sell it, can we publish Grandpa's drawings later?" Ellie reread the terms. The answer was no. The agreement assigned all claims. Images, notebooks, and derivative research to Crow. He deleted the unsigned document. "Then we find a way that doesn't make you pay for my decision," he said. He called Vanessa directly and proposed a controlled inspection of prototype 3x2 independent engineers, with both parties present. In return, he would postpone any separate authorship claim until the inspection report was complete. Vanessa hesitated. The Heritage Center's opening was 12 days away, and the prototype was the central exhibit. If the event opened under a public cloud, sponsors might withdraw. She agreed, but only at the Crow facility and without media. The inspection began the following Tuesday. Ellie, Claire, Ruth, Helen, Price, Pike, and 2 engineers selected from a state professional society gathered around the restored car. Vanessa ordered her staff to remove the left side panel. Under decades of paint and grime, they found the approval plate exactly where the magazine photograph showed it. It read, "Chassis Layout W, Mercer, Fixture Revision 3, Accepted G, Crow, 41190. Nobody cheered. The wording mattered too much for that. Walter was named for chassis layout. Grant was named for acceptance. It did not prove Walter owned every right, but it directly contradicted the company's published claim that Grant had designed the chassis geometry alone. Pike suggested the plate might have been added during a later restoration. Claire handed one engineer the dated magazine image showing the plate before the first race. The university archivist joined by video and displayed the original negative sleeve, processing log, and contact sheet. The plate had existed in 1990. The second engineer compared the frame coordinates with Walter's notebook and the trailer jig. 11 primary points aligned within the tolerance recorded in the book. A 12th point showed the 3/16 left offset Claire had noticed on the first day. The car itself had become an independent physical copy of Walter's undocumented drawing. Vanessa asked everyone except Price to leave the room for 10 minutes. When they returned, she did not surrender. She said one plate on one prototype could support shared authorship. While the company still owned work produced under its funding, she was legally and historically entitled to make that case. But she also ordered Pike to provide the independent engineers access to the uncatalogued boxes from Grant's private office. "If we're going to defend the history," she said, "we will defend what actually happened." That decision came too late to prevent a new attack. Pike had already contacted a licensing partner and described Ellie's notebook as possibly misappropriated company material. The partner froze royalty payments to Crow pending clarification. Facing a cash squeeze before the Heritage opening, the Crow board instructed Vanessa to recover the jig or settle the dispute. Pike recommended seeking an emergency seizure by alleging risk to the prototype rights. Vanessa signed the filing. Price warned her that the inspection report would undermine any claim that Ellie fabricated the evidence, but she argued that possession of disputed source documents created continuing harm. The sheriff served the papers on Thursday. A hearing was set for Monday. The same day sponsors could cancel the Heritage opening without penalty. Ellie's lawful response depended on chain of custody. He and Claire had documented the floor removal, but their video had 2 gaps while a battery charged. Crow's filing focused on those gaps. Helen needed proof that the maker's plate and stamped coordinates had not been inserted during the missing time. Lewis remembered the trailer's underside. Before hauling it from the auction, he had taken insurance photographs beneath every corner because the borrowed truck owner required them. One image captured the factory drain holes. Through a hole, part of the black jig base and one original corroded mounting bolt were visible above the crossmember. The image metadata and insurer upload predated the sale's completion by 40 minutes. It proved the fixture was inside while Crow still owned the trailer. Martin, the auction clerk, provided the lot inspection form. It recorded the scale estimate as 13,000 pounds, but marked the interior not emptied by seller. Crow's disposal manager had recommended selling without further labor. The company's own choice, not Ellie's concealment, explained the mistake. In Grant's uncatalogued boxes, the independent engineers found the final links. There were 3 typed memoranda from Walter requesting that future releases credit chassis layout by Walter Mercer, program direction by Grant Crow, dynamics consultation by Ruth Bell. Grant had initialed 2 without answering. A 4th document, written by Grant to a sponsor, said Walter's mobile fixture lets us carry each revision from drawing to track without resquaring the car. It established that Grant knew Walter had built and controlled the jig. The most damaging paper was not a confession. It was a purchase proposal in 1992 after Walter left. Crow Racing offered to buy Mercer Mobile Fixture number 1 and associated layout books for $18,000. Walter wrote declined across the copy if Crow already owned the fixture and books. It would not have offered to buy them. At 5:30, she called Ellie. She offered $400,000, restoration of the trailer, and a plaque naming Walter co-designer. In exchange, Crow would own the jig and notebooks, and both parties would release historic claims. It was enough money to secure Claire's education and the shop. It also preserved Crow's control over access. Eli asked whether Ruth's role would appear. Vanessa said the plaque could name her as consultant. He asked whether the 3 memoranda and purchase proposal would be released to researchers. Vanessa said private company correspondence would remain sealed. Then the plaque depends on your company being honest forever, Eli said. That's how we got here. He rejected the offer. His counterproposal asked for no personal damages. Crow would withdraw its property claim, recognize Ellie's ownership of the trailer and fixture, digitize the relevant archive through an independent university, correct its publications, and license the prototype geometry under terms naming Walter, Grant, and Ruth according to their roles. Ellie would lend the jig to the Heritage Center for 2 years, provided Claire could help design the exhibit, and the original notebook remained with the Mercer family. Vanessa said the board would never accept loss of control. Ellie answered, Then let the judge decide possession Monday, and let your sponsors decide what hidden records are worth. The Monday hearing was held in a courtroom too small for the interest it had drawn. The judge prohibited cameras, but representatives from the licensing partner, heritage sponsors, and State Motorsports Museum attended. Vanessa sat behind Price with the strain of someone who had slept little. Eli brought no supporters beyond Claire, Ruth, Lewis, and Helen. Helen presented the evidence in 6 simple steps. The bill of sale transferred the trailer and attached fixtures. Pre-sale photographs proved the jig was already built into it. The maker's plate, notebook, and physical coordinates connected it to Walter. Ruth's dated invoices and photograph established his work before the prototypes were public. Prototype 3's original approval plate named Walter for chassis layout and Grant for acceptance. Finally, Crow's 1992 purchase proposal showed the company itself had once treated the fixture and books as Walter's property. Price did not pretend the documents meant nothing. He argued that the $900 price and hidden nature of the fixture supported rescission under mutual mistake. He also argued that the court should not decide authorship in a possession hearing. On the second point, Helen agreed. She asked only that Crow's emergency seizure be denied and that the completed commercial sale remain effective unless Crow proved fraud or a contractual exclusion. The judge ruled from the bench. Crow had controlled the property, drafted the listing, possessed weight information, and chosen not to inspect. The company could not convert its own incomplete inventory into evidence of fraud. The fixture was structurally integrated and expressly covered by the attached fixtures language. The request for seizure was denied. Any separate intellectual property claim would require a different case. But the 1992 offer made Crow's assertion of clear prior ownership unlikely to succeed. The legal consequence was immediate. The licensing partner invoked an audit clause requiring accurate provenance disclosures. State Museum paused its endorsement of the Heritage Center. 2 sponsors said they would remain only if the independent archive opened. None of them demanded Vanessa humiliate herself. They demanded a process they could trust. Outside the courtroom, Pike urged her to appeal and blame a disposal employee. Vanessa looked at Martin, who had followed every instruction on the lot sheet. Then at Claire, holding Walter's notebook against her chest. She dismissed Pike as corporate historian before she spoke to the cameras. Vanessa said Crow Racing had completed a sale it regretted and then used its greater resources to pressure the buyer. She accepted the court's ruling. More importantly, she acknowledged that newly verified records identified Walter Mercer as the chassis layout designer of the 3 early prototypes and Ruth Bell as the dynamics consultant, with Grant Crow directing and financing the program. She announced that the company would accept Eli's archive proposal, subject to final written terms. It was not an apology for everything, and Eli did not demand one on the courthouse steps. Accountability would be measured in documents, contracts, and conduct over time. The settlement took 6 weeks. Crow paid Eli's legal costs and compensated Mercer Fabrication for the canceled repair order. Without buying the jig, the university received funds from both parties to scan the relevant archive. Existing licensees kept their rights, but future certificates carried the corrected authorship. Ruth recorded an oral history that described Grant's real contributions as well as Walter's. No one had to turn one man into a thief to restore another man's name. Vanessa offered Claire a paid internship at the Heritage Center. Claire accepted only after the school confirmed it would not interfere with her independent project. She designed the exhibit around 3 layers: Walter's notebook, Ruth's calculations, and Grant's program decisions. Visitors could see how a race car emerged from disagreement, measurement, money, and repeated correction rather than from one famous man's inspiration. Eli used the reimbursed legal fees and restored contract payment to buy back the tube bender from its new owner, who charged him exactly what he had paid. He repaired the shop roof himself with Lewis. He did not become wealthy, and the trailer did not become a polished museum piece overnight. For the first year, it spent weekdays serving as the mobile workshop Eli and Claire had intended. On selected weekends, they hauled it to the Heritage Center and raised the hidden datum towers for demonstrations. The first demonstration drew retired mechanics, young engineering students, and men who had watched the original prototypes race. Vanessa stood at the edge of the group without a camera crew. When a visitor called the jig Grant Crow's invention, she corrected him before Eli could speak. Grant funded the program and approved the cars, she said. Walter Mercer designed the chassis layout and built this fixture. Ruth Bell helped make the geometry work. The record is finally specific. Eli heard the sentence and went back to helping Claire level the forward rail. That was the change he trusted, not a dramatic speech, but the person with the most reason to preserve the old story, choosing accurate words when nobody important seemed to be listening. Claire graduated the following spring. Her portable measuring system won a state technical scholarship after she entered it independently, with Mercer fabrication named clearly on every drawing. The judges praised the device. But Walter's old rule mattered more to her. Each revision carried a date, an author, a reason, and the name of anyone whose suggestion changed the design. On the evening before Claire left for college, she and Eli worked inside the trailer with both rear doors open. The restored lights cast warm rectangles across the black rails. She had fabricated a small brass plate for the new measuring cart. It read C. Mercer, with E. Mercer, Revision 1. There was room below for future names. Eli fastened it with 2 visible screws. He did not paint over them. Then he opened Walter's notebook to the page where the 3 prototype coordinate sets began and placed Claire's drawing beside it. The numbers were different. The purpose was different. And the hand holding the pencil belonged to a new generation. Yet the triangle Walter once used to keep his mark from being erased appeared in the lower corner, joined by Claire's full printed name. Outside, the old trailer still carried rust along its lower edge. Inside, every maker was finally visible.